So hello, everyone. My name is Amy Gantman, and I'm the Executive Director of the Brentwood Arts Center. I thank you and welcome you to our virtual auditorium for BAC's Conversations on Art series with our host, Meg Linton, and guest artist, Lucas Reiner. I'm joining you today from BAC's new studio pop-up in Santa Monica. We're located at 1025 Montana Avenue, where we're hosting in-person art courses for the first time in well over 2 years. We will be at the pop-up through the end of August. It's been a challenging time for the world and for BAC as we transitioned our offerings to a virtual format, which has allowed the BAC to continue to fulfill its mission of providing high-quality arts educational opportunities to students of all ages. Our success is due to our incredible and generous board of directors, leadership council, donors, staff, faculty, and students who support the BAC through thick and through thin. The pandemic has also allowed us to experiment with new technology and create programs like Conversations on Art. And I'd like to thank the anonymous donor who made this series possible for the next 12 months. We can only do all that we do because of our generous donors who believe everyone should have access to the arts and education. Our host, Meg Linton, and I met at Otis College of Art and Design while she was the director of exhibitions for the Ben Maltz Gallery, and I was the dean of continuing education. We collaborated on many public programs, and I'm thrilled that we are able to bring her love and respect for the artists to BAC. She has been visiting artist studios for over 20 years in her various roles as a director and curator of contemporary art spaces in the Central and Southern California region. Currently, Meg is a lead producer on a documentary film about performance art in Los Angeles in the 1970s and 80s called Acting Like Women, directed by Sherry Galkey. She is also working on an exhibition about the life and work of artist Keith Julius Puccinelli. She's writing a novel and, of course, conversing with Lucas Reiner for the BAC this afternoon. I welcome Meg Linton.
Thank you, Amy. It's a pleasure to be here. And hello, everyone. Welcome to our conversation and our virtual studio visit with Lucas Reiner. It's midsummer, and I hope you are all having fun wearing hats and using sunscreen, and we really appreciate you joining us on your lunch hour today. Before I introduce our guest, a big thank you to the Brentwood Arts Center and our anonymous donor for making this program possible, and to our behind-the-scenes team, Kathleen, Jason, and Miriam. We are recording today's presentation, and we ask that you please mute your microphones and turn off your video. During the conversation, if you have any questions, please type them into the chat box, and I will either work them into the discussion or ask them at the end. In the chat box, you'll also see that I've put some additional information and links about Lucas's work and his biography and his upcoming show at Pepperdine that's opening this August. So Lucas and I originally met through the artist Steve Roden, and later during my time at Otis. Lucas actually is an alum of Otis. So he has a prolific career working in Los Angeles, Berlin, Oregon, and Connecticut, and he's joining us from Connecticut today. He has produced several notable series exploring the urban and natural landscape overlaid with ideas of devotion and the spiritual. We've pulled together a selection of photography, film, painting, etchings, and sculpture to share with you. And Lucas, thank you for being here and giving us your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Meg. And thank you, Brentwood Arts Center, for hosting. And very happy to be here.
Great. So we're just going to dive in. I've told everyone, Lucas, that this is before in previous programs that, this is in lieu of a studio visit. So it's very kind of informal, chatty conversation to just kind of start in. And we thought we'd, since some of you may not know Lucas's work, start with some of his older pieces and then work into more of his current bodies of work. So do you want to tell us what we're looking at?
Yeah, this is I just thought I dug this out. It's a collage that I made when I was a student at Otis. I was also studying with Marty Lubner, a wonderful painter who was on the west side of Los Angeles and taught private classes on Abbott Kinney in the early 80s and throughout the 80s and 90s. And anyway, this was a collage that I made and I just liked it. I felt I should show it. It's an image of Saint Jerome from a painting by Leonardo, and it was just a kind of a funky collage that I put together. I don't know, 23 or 24 years old, and I don't know why I like it, but just seemed kind of a place to start, maybe having
Well, it's
something.
also a precursor to some work that shows up later.
Yeah, it's kind of it was interesting for me to stumble on it and see this precursor and this devotional image of Saint Jerome and this idea of translating something, spiritual experience into, well, in his case, it was into words, but in my case, it's into images. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then this was from around the after I went to art school is the early 80s, and I made a series of 5-inch square gray 5-inch square paintings made of gesso and ink, and they were really like a kind of an attempt to forget everything that I had ever been taught. It was like trying to get down to this tabula rasa, clean Zen, just surface where I could start something new. In retrospect, that's what I'm saying. At the time, I was just looking at it to try to, kind of get down to a ground zero point and as a place to start. And I think I made about 50 of these over the years.
So did you say that this was right after finishing school?
Not right after, but I would say it was about, no, it was some years after. I would say this was the beginning of when I sort of rededicated myself to the idea that I was going to paint for the rest of my life. So it was some years later. I would say it was about 10 years later. So there were many years after, in between my education at Otis and the time that I started to exhibit, because I really just didn't feel I had anything to exhibit that was really worth exhibiting. I was working on other things and just, stumbling along as an artist, as one does, trying to find something. And so this was, I would say, the first thing that I found where I felt that I was really making something that I could exhibit. And in fact, this was the first work that I ever really exhibited in 1994 at Tom Solomon's gallery.
Oh, nice.
And it was kind of, it was just so that's why I wanted to maybe show it. It was like a place to start. This was maybe where I first started and said, okay, this is worth exhibiting. And that's always a question, because, artists, we're free to make anything and should be free to make anything all the time, but it doesn't mean that everything you make is necessarily that you want to exhibit it.
Well, I just really appreciate the fact you took some time to, I guess, kind of clean the slate, because oftentimes the graduate students that I would meet with and so forth, they were so worried and immediately wanted to get to showing. And at a certain point, you do have to forget everything that you learned, because you've been under the influence of all of these other teachers, other artists that you've been researching and everything. And so really to kind of take a moment, take a deep breath, go work 2 years in solitude if you can afford it, and find your voice. It's really, it's a good cleansing.
Totally agree. It's like it's great to have this youthful energy of, wanting to conquer the world and with your art and with what you're doing, but you also have to stop and ask the question, like, with what,
Yeah.
So that was, things take a while. And art is a long game. It's a long life. If we're lucky, it's a long life, and it's something you do it's not something you do speculatively to try it out for a few years. It's something you, hopefully, if you're dedicating your life to, and so you can always, it's always there for you. So this was a little, I think sometime after not too far after the Milo, those little, the little paintings, the 5-inch square paintings, there were a series of just driving around LA and kind of feeling lost about what I was doing there. And so I would look at words, and Los Angeles is such a linguistic city. There's language everywhere, words everywhere. So I was looking at words and reading the signs and reading words and trying to link up words with this sort of painterly gesture. In this case, this gray field that with the word exhausts, you read it sort of as, well, that could have something to do with the automobile, or it could have something to do with carbon monoxide, but it's anyway. So there were a series of these Mylar sign paintings. Oh, this was a great little place on Washington Boulevard.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's still there, but I loved the handmade signs, the hand painted signs I would see all over LA.
They'd sometimes have in the window discount caskets too.
Yeah. And then I would just kind of use the language as a prompt to think about a casket and, meditate on the casket and the car and the cloud and the sky, so it all just kind of became this, but language was the spark of these Mylar paintings. And they were also culturated. I mean, I was looking at the buildings, the architecture, the signage, as one does in Los Angeles. Yeah, thanks to Ed Ruscha.
Yes.
Anyway, and then this, so this is like maybe a precursor to what I would later do, although I didn't really know it at the time, but yeah, just starting to, the Royal Tree Company, that it's like a truck with a hand-painted sign that goes around and collects, tree trimmings and carts them off. And then this was I would say this painting was kind of one of the first ones where I had a different relationship to nature through an experience that I had in Michigan, but this was 2001. I remember painting this during listening to the audio reports of the 9/11, occasion, catastrophe, and then painting this and kind of feeling buried by the news, but also kind of lost in nature in a wonderful way, because we had just taken a family trip to Michigan, Upper Peninsula, Michigan. And I had this kind of epiphany in the deep woods of Michigan where I mean, even though we are on the edge of the Pacific Ocean and we have Yosemite and the Sierras, right? It all feels very kind of tamed. Nature feels very culturated and tamed in Los Angeles. And for me, being in this environment in the woods in Michigan, it was a very different experience of the sort of infinitude of nature and this experience that poets talk about. It happened to me very late in life. I was 40 at the time, but it was suddenly this big epiphany of infinity, or some kind of eternity of nature that was hidden from me, or I just wasn't looking that way in Los Angeles. Yeah.
So that led into.
So that led into then coming back from Michigan and trying to look at nature in Los Angeles in a new way. Asking the question, well, what do we have? What do we have in LA, and why do we have these trees? Why do they look the way they do? So the one on the right there is on National Boulevard. It's no longer there. It tipped over during a big rain, but you can see this hard angle in the middle of it that is the height of a truck. So the tree form is defined by the traffic going by. The one on the other side is, you see it right on Pico Boulevard, inches away from the street. So that's been cut by repeated traffic. And, you can read the McDonald's sign behind it, but you can imagine, you know, that eventually that tree will be cut because the McDonald's sign is more important that for motorists to read than to see the tree in Los Angeles. So I suddenly became aware of this constant like conflict between nature and culture right on the streets of Los Angeles. And it's sort of like the to be or not to be question. It's like, do we want nature or do we not want nature? You know, do we want to live or not live? So the signs, the donut shop under that trim tree on the right, it was more important than the tree. So the trees get cut by the shop owners or by the city. Usually it's by the shop owners because the budget for tree trimming in Los Angeles is not so big. And, you know, then there's some other uses of trees. The one on, here's one that strung with Christmas tree lights, and another one as a, you know, a stop for a flower sign. And then the grounds, you know, looking at I didn't really know I was going to paint the trees. I just was photographing them for a while and just noticing them, sketching them, looking at them, thinking about them. But then when I did eventually go to paint them, what kind of ground they were painted against became very important. And the colors in Los Angeles, the sky in Los Angeles is very unique, as we know, because of this smoggy layer or marine layer, whatever we want to call it. It's, you know, people think of LA as blue skies, which we do have many days of the year, but we're actually living within a kind of a gray layer, which is not really seen by us. But yet it does affect all the colors, and it does affect, well, our orientation,
Yeah,
to the city, you know.
it gives us that special light that everyone talks about, and it's part of it is because of this haze.
Yeah, it gives
Capturing it.
definitely special light and special colors that you don't see in other places.
Mm-hmm.
Browns and pinks that I've never seen really anywhere else.
You want to tell us about this little video? So you went from that to
yeah. So then this video, this is Heather Siebold and I made this film together, and I think Heather's maybe watching.
Heather's in our audience today.
Oh, good. Hi, Heather.
Yeah.
Anyway, so this was like it ended up being about a 3.5-minute film, and it was just basically tree portraits. I had been by this point, I think, painting trees for a few years, and then painting the trees as portraits, and then just took it one step further and said, well, let's make a film featuring the trees as the sort of subject for portraiture. And one thing that was kind of, I thought, fun about this, and Heather and I have gone on to make many other films as well on this subject, but what I loved about this was the editing strategy, which is, it's not arbitrary when one image, an image of one tree cuts to another image. We filmed the tree for as long as we could film it before a car passed by.
Oh.
And so the editorial decisions were made on by eliminating the traffic in Los Angeles. So anytime a car entered into the frame, we would cut to the next tree, because the whole focus of this was to try to sort of reclaim the tree as an object of meditation, of
priority. I mean,
a priority of kind of, yeah, of sacredness even, let's say. So I like that it was, but I love that metaphor. And now some cities are actually doing it. Like I just heard about Paris, that the mayor of Paris, there's no longer cars allowed in the center of Paris. It's all just bicycles. You know, so there's something, although I'm not an activist. I wasn't thinking of this at the time we made it. I was more just liking the poetic metaphor of it. But, you know, there's like, maybe this could also be like a blueprint for a new Los Angeles, you know, like right. where we prioritize the tree, which is a sort of background image to everything else that happens in Los Angeles, like, you know, real estate and whatever, in entertainment industry, all the things, the reason people are there, but make it somehow priority.
Yeah. And did you do a couple of variations? Wasn't there one where you paired it with a poem?
Yeah, originally this film had a Walt Whitman poem. Well, it was a section, different sections from Leaves of Grass, and it was read by the Reverend Paul Sawyer.
Oh, nice.
And we recorded him reading it, and he gave a beautiful reading of the Whitman poem. But what I noticed after watching it with the text, and the reason I decided ultimately to drop it, was that when you don't, I mean, now we're talking over it, but generally when you're watching an image without any sound, you see more.
Right.
Than having to think about a poem or think about text. And that was the point, was wanting, to maximize the visual. But I think that version exists on YouTube or somewhere.
Yeah.
Paul Sawyer.
I think that I saw it at a show at Domestic Setting or something. You had it.
Yeah.
Maybe it was there. Yeah.
That might have been it. Yeah.
Yeah. It was really beautiful. But I can see what it does. It has a different feel, and it does make you really look at the trees as individuals more than trying to fit it within a context of a voice.
Yeah. No, his was a great version, and we still have that version of it.
Yeah.
And I just had him read my edition of Leaves of Grass. I strung together all the underlined passages, and he read it so beautifully. And I said, that it seems like you've read that before. It was just so natural how he did. And he said that he had used that in a sermon before. So
nice.
he's very familiar with that text. Yeah. So anyway, yeah, this is I think Eve Wood has this drawing.
Really? Oh, nice.
Yeah, Eve. And this is just one of the portraits, early tree portrait. I mean, it's funny, I remember where most of these trees are. This was on 20th Street in Santa Monica.
So talk about how you made this. Is this a painted surface that you drew on, or is
this is this is a piece of paper with some watercolor on it. Watercolor white, like white watercolor, a wash of white watercolor. And then it's graphite, some pencil, and I think and maybe some silver point in with this too, because if you put like a white wash of watercolor, you can use silver point on the paper and get a very subtle kind of line. And I think, if I remember, there was also, I was sort of starting to etch into, or not etch in, not breaking the surface, but pushing. This is a very soft paper, so I was pushing the surface of the paper down to create a little sort of void indentation, and then you could rub over that some graphite, so to get another quality of line, another kind of line. I mean, the thing is about painting and drawing, and it's all just really about the pressure, not only this, but the pressure you apply to the surface.
Right. Because it feels like it's exploding. It has a nice kind of center point in it.
Yeah. It's kind of off-center, the trunk, like you would just think, oh, it could be a firework almost.
Yeah.
Could be a firework explosion, but then this off-center trunk lets you know that there's something else going on there. These off-center trunks, once I started noticing them, I saw them everywhere. This was actually in Milan. I was doing an exhibition in Milan, and I went to photograph a lot of trees there. And this was a very beautiful, old, healthy tree on an apartment, a big, long street of very old, big, huge apartment buildings. And same thing, it had, maybe 100 years ago, or it was growing full out, but now it had gotten so big that it was growing into the building, and they had to trim the side of it that closest to the building to create a walkway, passageway,
How big are these?
This one's about a foot they're, all about portrait size, like 1 foot. Well, these earlier ones were about 1 foot by 12 by 11 or 14 by 12. Yeah. That one's 14 by 12. Yeah, the other I think was like 12 by 11 or 11 by 10. This one's 14 by 12. So yeah, this was early portrait of a tree from, I think, around 2002. And this was a tree on Pico Boulevard.
So each tree really has a story for you.
Yeah, and in fact, I before I even started working on them, I was just assembling what has now become an archive of about 3,000 images of trees around Los Angeles. And it was a kind of, in a weird way, like a way to adopt these trees, or just a way of stopping and noticing, well, the way drawing is, if you stop and draw something or sketch something, it's a kind of observation and a kind of a noticing that's different from just your daily life. And this device of the camera and now the iPhone is kind of like creating an instant sketch. It gives you information that you can use later. It's not the only thing. You can't, there's more information in real observation than you can just get from a photograph. And I was never interested in just painting photographs, but using the photograph the way you use a sketch or a drawing as a sort of tool, for your ultimate, eventual painting. This is one of those situations where I think the tree, the shop owner calls the city and says, hey, motorists can't read my shop sign. Can you come out and trim the tree? And they say, well, you're on Western Avenue. Well, this will probably change soon as it's gentrified, but you're on Western Avenue. We can't do that. So just call a tree trimmer. So people look in the phone book and, under tree trimmer, get somebody to come with a chainsaw and a truck. And they just say, well, just cut off the tree, cut off the top part of the tree. And then people—
They're not necessarily arborists who know how to
right.
take care of the life of the tree. But that's why, I mean, you've created these kind of solitary, amputated figures that still have potential, but it keeps getting kind of cut off. There's a lot of emotion, at least I perceive a lot of emotion in these. And a lot of it's that tension between potential and growth, and then kind of being squashed and suffering and the pain.
Yeah. I mean, I think
pain of existence.
Yeah, I think that contemporary life is largely about that. I think it's a condition of our lives, Also, I was thinking about, social realism was kind of superseded by abstract expressionism. And after abstract expressionism came in, like, museums were calling painters and saying, we'd like to give you back your paintings, basically.
Oh my goodness.
Like Thomas Hart Benton, or I don't know about Philip Evergood, but a lot of those, those painters, social realism was all of a sudden kind of, denigrated, put on a lower level. But so I was thinking, well, how, but we live these social lives too. So how can you paint somebody? Could you paint a portrait? I mean, Alice Neal did it so beautifully, but how do you paint a portrait of a person, but in a different way, too? So the trees, they also became, for me, about us, about people. Well, as you just kind of indicated, this energy and this hope and promise, and then the conditions of society pushing us down. Yeah, the body gets bigger, the trees. So they started the trees started to get a little bigger in the frame, but and I that last one you showed, Meg, is that really maybe the largest. Well, there are a couple large trees, and I think it's an impulse that artists often have. It's like you start small, you do something small, it's working on a small scale, and then you think like, well, I'll make it bigger. And so I thought, okay, I'll try to make the tree bigger. And here's one, this is about 36 inches tall. So it's a larger tree, and one of the few where the tree is larger. There's a couple others.
Yeah.
But as I started to go down that road, it just felt false. It didn't feel right to me, and
Right.
it felt like the tree wanted to stay small in the frame. So then rather than increasing the size of the tree, I did increase the size of the painting, and this painting's about 33 inches tall. But the tree sort of stayed the same size, but this opened up a whole new kind of realm of inquiry of how much space, what is this space around the tree, and how much space, in other words, when I first started painting the trees, I was kind of recreating the confining conditions of the city against the tree, and in the small frame. But as I went on, I thought, well, I'm making these paintings, I can do whatever I want. I can give it more space. I can give the tree room to grow. So I started to increase the space around the tree rather than the size of the tree.
And it has a dual kind of effect, because it dwarfs the tree. So but then look at all the potential it has to kind of fill the space. But yet then this gray space is so all consuming, it's keeping it, so again, that tension that you have.
Yeah. Maybe it's also like, we're looking at a small confined tree portrait. We're looking at the human zone, and then we expand the space, and then you can focus on the non-human zone as much as the human zone. This was an installation in Regensburg, Germany, of tree portraits. So this just to see them in context of the portrait scale.
And the variety.
Yeah, the variety,
they're almost like cartoon shapes.
Yeah, the variety was really my way of processing this experience, or translating, I should say, this experience of infinitude that I mentioned in the woods of Michigan. And the way I was able to translate that experience was through this kind of, bewildering realization that is people say about snowflakes, like, oh, no two look exactly alike. And I was look at all these trees, and especially in Los Angeles, they all look so different, and they're so many unique shapes and forms. And so connecting to that sort of infinite variety of a tree, of the form, was a way to translate that. Yeah, then people started giving me pictures of trees, and this was a wonderful kind of byproduct that I discovered doing this, is that, growing up in Los Angeles, it's like everybody's there for, not everybody, but the dominant reason people are there are for, money making, hustling, entertainment industry, this kind of thing. So coming from a famous family, people would always say to me, like, oh, I have this script, and can you get your father to read it? Can I give the script to you to get your father to read, or get your brother to read this or something? And it was always a bit of a pain. So once I started painting trees, people started giving me pictures of trees.
That's nice. Instead of scripts.
Instead of scripts. And it was like, the people would say, oh, have you seen this tree on Catalina? You got to see this tree on Catalina Avenue, or right by Los Feliz. There's this amazing tree. And so people would hand me, give me directions to trees.
That's nice.
Yeah. And I would go look at
the conversation.
Yeah. So it kind of quite literally was a concrete experience of how art can change your life, Anyway, this one, on Robertson Boulevard, and the cut tree, completely cut, that it was, then growing back, and eventually will become a fuller tree, But when you see these trees with
for a period of time until it's chopped back again.
Exactly. But, and you would never know once it grows full, except for the size of the trunk. The width of the trunk is always the giveaway that it's, when you see, even if you see a full, canopy. Yeah. What do you say about that?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, then just expanding the space. Maybe this was also a kind of a step to, you know, so expanding the space first within the frame of the canvas, then maybe this is a diptych of two different trees that have a similar shape, but they belong together. And so the idea of the space around the image within the painting, and then the space around the painting with it in this small painting. And maybe this was the first step of thinking about this kind of self-conscious act of walking from one painting to another, you know, of moving from one painting to another painting.
So kind of is like a zoom in, zoom out kind of effect as you walk through the gallery.
Yeah.
You know, which was, yeah.
Yeah, and maybe the idea that you can't see the whole thing, the painting is not just ascertainable in one image, in one experience, you know, that it happens over multiple paintings.
Cool. Case just asked, he said, are they mostly ficus trees that you?
Yeah, a lot of them are. I mean, it just turned out that way, that because ficus they're kind of like the frontline soldiers, you know, they put them on Washington, Venice, Western, because they're so indestructible. And the more they're cut, in fact, the deeper the roots, stronger the root system grows. And you do see a lot of ficus right on boulevards. And there's something I love about how indestructible the ficus tree is. Yeah, this was a painting I made right around the time my mom passed away. And it's an elevating tree. Yeah, kind of a flying up tree.
Yeah.
Large painting, 105 inches by 85. And this was actually, you know, anyway, this was kind of like maybe.
Yeah, we'll go to another one.
Presenting the tree in a kind of in a different way, in a non-normative way. So the tree started to kind of elevate from being on the bottom frame, on the bottom of the canvas. And part of how that happened, I think, came out of this. I love to draw in museums. I love going with my sketchbook and drawing paintings in museums. And when I was making a lot of these paintings, I was drawn to a lot of Renaissance paintings where trees would appear in the backgrounds. And I would just make quick sketches and drawings of the compositions without the foregrounded people. So the trees are existing in the background and they're kind of reinforcing the story that you see in the foreground. So it was another kind of articulation of the tree as a background image. In Los Angeles, the tree is a background image. In Renaissance paintings, the trees are background, they're mise en scène to the front, you know, the drama happening in front. But I found that by removing the foregrounded drama of these religious paintings, that the meanings could still come across just by picturing the backgrounds. So yeah, this is another one of that from that time, around 2007, I guess. 2000, yeah, something like that. This was actually commissioned by a farm lab. It was now Metabolic Studios, but at the time there was a concern, a sort of sub heading of Metabolic Studios, which was called Farm Lab, and this was 2 walnut trees that were the last 2 remaining trees at the South Central Farms down on I think, is it Long Beach Avenue? Downtown, and they were to be dug up and moved to the Huntington Museum. along with, I think, 97 other trees. And these were the 2 remaining walnut trees. And yeah, so I kind of painted them, imagining them being airlifted, sort of being taken out of the earth and moved across town. Started to, in these last few paintings that you've shown, you can start to see the backgrounds becoming a little more, a little less neutral, let's say, and a little more having an impact on the foregrounded image. So it's always, there seems to be this kind of ethic, let's call it, of always bringing the background to the foreground. And once that's achieved, then asking, well, what's behind that? What's behind that? What's behind that? And so that's a kind of a constant theme in the work, I think. This was from an installation of a show in Munich that I did. So you see the relationships of them.
You've been able to show them in some really beautiful spaces.
I've been very lucky. Yeah, this was shown at the Macy's window with some models in some mannequins in front of it.
Really?
Yeah, wearing Calvin Klein clothing. So yeah, I don't have an image of it, but okay. So here's this an example of just a tree I saw in, I think, at a museum in Munich, and it was it's by a Dutch painter, Cornelis van Dalem, and it's kind of a Protestant painting of a tree that you can see the ruins of the cathedral in the background, and you often see that in Caspar Friedrich, where the nature is foregrounded and the cathedral ruins in the background, and nature is overtaking the works of man. And but I just always liked this painting and the idea of putting the tree in the foreground and realizing that there was a precedent for this.
Yeah, and the presence of trees, I mean, they span time. So it's multiple histories, and they've been witness to so much.
Yeah, and the trees that we're busy butchering on the streets of Los Angeles are gonna one day be the only thing left of our lives, bearing witness to that. Oh yeah, there was this car driving down the street one day.
Yeah.
And then this is Saint Jerome and a Donor, a great painting by Piero della Francesca, and just a painting that I drew. It's in Venice and at the Accademia, and I just loved the trees and the relationship of the 2 figures and the relationship of the 2 trees. And I just started to notice that in so many paintings where trees were not considered the foregrounded. And this is Piero della Francesca, the dead tree on the left, and then the live tree on the right. So it's kind of a resurrection painting, and the guards are all asleep at the bottom. And
we're showing these more historical paintings because we're leading up to a new body of work that Lucas has been
yeah. So I mean, really leading up to a series of paintings that I just put those slides in to really show how my thinking about what I was doing coincided, or just was in kind of in concert with my mother-in-law, Anne Winchester, who might also be watching today. And she invited me to make a Stations of the Cross for her church in Washington, D.C., St. Augustine's Episcopal Church. And when she asked me to do that, it made total sense, because I already kind of had an idea of how to work with this kind of sacred imagery, and a rough idea of how I might do that. And so it was also around the time my mother passed away. It was 2008. And so the last year of her life, she was suffering a lot. One whole year in bed. And so witnessing that kind of suffering, the
Yeah.
tree paintings and the backgrounds of the Renaissance. It was all kind of a piece where it felt like a very natural progression to take in my work to make a series of stations.
And so this is Barnett Newman, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then we've got the Rothko Chapel.
Yeah, the Rothko Chapel, which is not titled the Stations of the Cross, but I mean, it's 14 paintings.
Yeah.
It's 14 paintings in a kind of a church-like setting. Ed Ruscha, this is 26 gasoline stations.
A different type of station. And we had talked about this, like, you know, these are like pilgrimage points along the highway, right?
Yeah, what I heard about this, and I don't know if it's true, but that he would drive from Los Angeles to Oklahoma to visit his mother or visit his family and photograph the filling stations along the way from LA to there and from Oklahoma back to LA. And so these become, kind of
markers of his trip, his journey.
Yeah. And I always loved that series and how the size of those filling stations existed within, the Western landscape. And
and so this is the suite that you created.
This is the suite of etchings that was made for St. Augustine's. And this is them installed. And I started with the stations making etchings. These are very small, like 6 by 4 inches. And I sort of used my archive of photographs of trees as a kind of had a casting call, so to speak, for, the stations. And so taking the 15 stations and looking through my archive and sort of choosing which trees could play which roles. So this is the first station, Jesus is Condemned, and I used this tree, this one I happened to see in Italy, but most of the trees are from Los Angeles. And anyway, so the etchings are a suite of 15 different trees. And then after the etchings were installed in the church, or after I completed the etchings, I always knew I wanted to make something more out of the series and make a larger work. And so this is one installation shot of 5 of the 15 station paintings, and the 15 paintings comprise one work, and it fills, a room. And so the idea is they're not 15 separate paintings, they're connected.
And what is it about this subject matter that you decided to stick with it?
I knew after the etchings that I had more to say about it. This is the 15th station, the Resurrection. I just knew I wanted to say more. And I wanted to bring in color. And I wanted to bring in a different kind of surface and gesture. I don't have a ton of photos of this series that I put in this presentation, but the paintings of the trees are much more gestural. They're looser. The relationship of the trees to the surface is very kind of mysterious in that they're sort of embedded into the surface rather than put on top. So often they're buried under and then excavated.
What do you have planned for this series? Because you had mentioned that this series might be shown.
Well, the etchings are going to be shown. The etchings will be shown at Pepperdine. They were shown in Los Angeles at Bridge Projects. They did a beautiful show called To Bow and to Bend that opened right before the pandemic started. And so I don't know how many people saw it, but then I guess Pepperdine University decided to restage the show. So the etchings will be on view there. The paintings are, I'm looking for venues. Let's just say that. Yeah.
And then this is a new body of work that kind of is merging the two.
Yeah.
That you've been working on, and you've been making these in Connecticut.
Yeah, this is a series of, these are very small, like 11 by 9, inches. And these are muslin and tempera on wood panels. And these are, there's a series of kind of, I guess they're sort of like marriage trees. I was staying at a house here and there were 2 trees planted. And somebody was telling me that often it's kind of a tradition, people would get a house and plant 2 trees, and those are like the marriage trees, you know. But I just noticed these 2 trees over the different seasons, and just became kind of fascinated by them and by the negative shapes as well. Again, so the foreground background relationship. So that center image that you see, which one thing you see a lot in New England is that every 10 minutes you come upon a little small cemetery. So there's grave markers everywhere here. And something we don't have in Los Angeles, unless you know, we just have huge
Pre-planned communities.
Yeah, for our dead.
Yes.
You know? So, but here they're really integrated into like daily life. You can't go, you know, 10 minutes drive or 5-minute drive without seeing a handful of tombstones. And so I started to think about this relationship between the negative spaces and the positive space, the tree and the space between the tree. And I started to just see these kind of shapes in a different way.
And again, these are tiny, right?
They're like 9 by 11.
Nice.
They're very small. And was looking a lot at Russian icon paintings and just icon paintings in general, but I happen to have this book of Russian icon paintings that are really beautiful. Yeah, this is another one. Yeah, and this one, you know, it's really like that famous thing of the I think Jasper Johns did one version of like the 2 faces that form a cup or something in the center. So, you know, this was like playing around with this flattening and you know, the 2 trees on the side, the negative shape, this kind of.
And they do kind of come in and out of focus.
Yeah, depending on what you want to look, which area you want to privilege. And then I think this kind of what's new for me in this work, which kind of harkens back to that collage of Saint Jerome that we saw, was the tearing of the muslin. So that last piece, there's like, it's like these pieces that are put together to make a whole surface. So there's this kind of sense of piecing things back together, you know, after something's been torn apart. And that makes sense because these last 2 years, my father passed away 2 years ago. And after he died, it was like, I just felt like I needed something new, like a new way to work. And this kind of tearing apart, tearing up the muslin and then reassembling it in a different way was a very kind of consistent with how the sculptures I was making at the time. Yeah, and here's one sculpture where, you know, I was walking around in the woods again and just finding sticks and gathering sticks and putting them together and, you know, with wood and plaster, wax, and making sort of my own trees out of them. But this idea of like reanimating something that was dead, you know, this idea that here there's dead wood and I'll bring it back and I'll try to reanimate it, put it back together in a way that makes it whole. And also there was a, you know, just, I don't know, I felt after he passed away, this real urge to like touch something, you know, to feel something with my hands. And, you know, I hadn't really made any sculpture since, you know, since I was a student at Otis. I just been painting.
Well, and you're working, you said you were working with a foundry or something in Oregon?
Yeah. This one is a photo from the foundry of a large sculpture that will go into a collection here in Connecticut. And this is like 8.5 feet tall by 5.5 wide. And there's a wonderful foundry in Baker City, Oregon that I've been working with. And this was we're working out the patina for the bronze. So these are bronze.
Wow.
Yeah. And they're kind of like my father.
Yeah.
kind of a tribute to him in a way.
Yeah.
Kind of energy. And then this was, oh, now going back to this I think was a photograph from Bridge Projects of the stations that were, that was photographed in the Bridge show to Bound to Bend. And this will be the work that's shown at Pepperdine.
Yeah.
Just to bring it to the current, back to the current.
And there's the info on the show.
There's the info on the show.
So this is kind of our conversation. Does anybody have any questions for Lucas?
There's a
I know we
chat.
covered a lot of material. I have a question for you, Lucas. It seems like poetry and music and philosophy play a lot in your work or influence you.
That's,
So how you know, we've referenced poetry, but I also know you're an avid reader and you're surrounded by creative people with your family, your wife and your kids.
yeah.
So how do you take that all in? Does that, do you shut it out and go away and work on your own work, or are you just constantly pulling in references? Or
No, I think I'm pulling in references.
Mhm.
I mean, I think everything goes into the work like a big soup, you know. I think things I read and family and music, and you know, we play a lot of music and with my family, and I think I don't know, I read a lot of poetry, read a lot of theology especially when I was making the stations, which was about a 7-year period. But all kinds of things. I like detective fiction too. I don't know, it just kind of like, it all kind of mulches in there. You know, sometimes it's more specific, like with the stations, when I was making that, and that was about a 7-year process, I did feel the need to kind of keep a lot out, you know, because I felt like I was trying to focus on something very specific. And I didn't want too much coming into it. And in fact, when I started the stations, I was going through this like 1-year like this chelation period because I had heavy metal poisoning. So I was keep going through this, ridding my body of toxins. So it was a lot about like limiting the influence, expelling things, you know. But I think it's just one of those expansive, contractive experiences, you know, where sometimes you expand and you cure, and then other times you retreat and want to just focus on something small. Yeah, it's hard. I can't regulate it. I don't choose it. I feel like I don't choose it, you know. It just comes up. Like I don't say, oh, I'm gonna paint marriage trees now, or oh, I'm gonna, you know, it's like the work happens and then I suddenly become analytical and I realize, like, why am I doing this? Oh, well, this makes sense. I must be doing this because of this, this, and this. You know, there's some logic to it, but it's not premeditated. And in that way, I don't feel like I'm connected to, I mean, we're all connected to the history of conceptual art, I guess, if you're making art right now, but I never felt very comfortable with that method of making work. I felt much more comfortable with the sort of, you know, do something and see what happens. You know, you can have a vague idea about what you're doing, but do it and then see what happens and then respond to what happens and then go with that.
Kind of more of the empirical experience versus the theoretical.
Yes.
Your starting point.
Yes. And I think conceptual art would tilted the scales the other way. And I was never that comfortable with it. And aesthetically, I think a lot of it is very limited. I think our visual capacity is much greater than anything we have in conceptual art. And the nuance of the pictorial space is really what painting has to offer. One of the main attractions of it, you know.
Well, you seem to have bridged the two worlds beautifully in your work.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Heather asked a question, but I think we're out of time.
What did Heather ask? I'm not seeing.
Can you talk more about how it seems to
Wait, there's 5 more messages. Okay. So
dark
can you talk
matter
more
of
about how it
existence.
seems to have circled back to the dark matter of existence, the whole progression, and then the sculpture, and even thinking about James Webb's new photos?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I don't know James Webb's new photos. I would love to see them. The dark matter of existence.
I'm just thinking
Yeah,
how
it's
sculpture-
always there. I mean, I was just walking and it's like the shadows are always there. And it's what's interesting is the early tree portraits, there were really no shadow. There weren't a lot of shadows, you know, and it was almost like always high noon or something. And but I was just walking the other day in the woods and looking at there's always shadows. And if that's maybe the dark web of existence, the dark matter, it's always there. It's always, it's what defines the light. If without the dark matter, we wouldn't have the light. So it's always some kind of interchange relationship or symbiotic dialectic or something.
I think that's a good place to end because we've run out of time, Lucas. I told you it would
Okay.
go really fast.
It went really fast.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing everything with us. And everybody, thank you for attending. We have our next program on August 5th with Lori Steeling, who will be coming. She's an artist out in San Pedro. And I hope you guys will all sign up. The link is live, so you can go to the website and sign up if you want to join us next month. So, okay, Lucas.
Thank you, Meg.